Welcome back. Connecticut has notably stricter gun laws than in other states. And you just heard the professor in our last segment say they seem to be working. Waterbury Police Chief Fernando Spagnolo spoke in front of the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee last week to talk about what he calls common sense solutions to prevent gun violence and how gun control on a national level will help Connecticut. Take a listen.
But Connecticut is not an island, and without federal action, we remain at the mercy of states with weak gun laws. Over 2/3 of the crime guns traced by law enforcement in Connecticut come from other states. And gun traffickers will continue to exploit weaknesses in the federal law. Unless we can stop the unchecked flow of guns into cities like mine, preventing cycles of violence will be almost impossible. Gun violence is not inevitable. And for the members of this body, you are in a position to enact sensible solutions that are in line with the Second Amendment.
So coming off his testimony this week, Chief Spagnolo joins us this morning. Chief, thanks for being with us. I know part of your message was that what's happening in Connecticut's working, but you didn't just want to talk about mass shootings, right? Because there's more to this story than that.
Absolutely, Eric. Thank you for having me here today. And I think when people look at Connecticut and some of the laws that we've changed in gun violence since Sandy Hook and throughout the years here, they make common sense. And we've seen, some reductions in gun violence here in Connecticut because of some of these laws. Background checks for each and every person over the age of 21 that wants to purchase a firearm, and having them have a concealed weapons permit and having a process in place for them to apply for that permit. And, store owners being able to check the background and check the numbers on the permit to make sure that there's been no changes and it's still valid, gives law enforcement an opportunity to know who that gun is registered to. If that gun comes up in some sort of investigation, we have a beginning spot, and it holds the person accountable that is actually purchasing the gun. It's also important to know that when folks apply for a pistol permit here in Connecticut, they have to go through some training. So we can be confident as a community and as a state to know that people that are purchasing guns know how to handle them, know how to store them, and know how to operate them with safety.
Obviously, we're doing this segment because of the shooting in Colorado this past week, and so much media attention is focused on this issue, unfortunately, every time there is a mass shooting. But I know you worked your way up through the ranks. You were on the street on patrol. There are more shootings than just the ones that, even we hear about because, there was a crime investigation. As a police officer, what is your message to the community? Because this is still a problem out there, right?
Absolutely. So, 2020 was a difficult year. For the state of Connecticut, especially the urban areas. We saw a distinct rise in violent crime, especially shooting victims and homicides with firearms. But beyond that, beyond the shootings and the assaults that occur, in Waterbury and in many other cities throughout the state, guns that are in prohibited person hands are being taken off the streets each and every day by our police officers. Since the beginning of this year, 1 to 2 guns in the hands of a prohibited person right here in Waterbury have been taken off the streets. So this poses a huge risk for my police officers and my command that are out there, operating and trying to keep our community safe. And it also poses an extreme risk for the members of our community.
So if the laws in Connecticut are working, you talked about background checks and pistol permits, you talked about the guns being taken out of the hands of prohibited persons. So where are those guns coming from, Chief?
So 2/3 of the guns that we come across here in Connecticut come from out of state. This is statistics that we're very familiar with, working with our federal partners at the Alcohol ATF and the United States Attorney's Office. So what happens is that, Connecticut laws don't apply in every state across the nation. And some of those states are close by. They're within driving proximity of Connecticut. So we do see guns coming into our borders, over our borders from states that don't have progressive gun laws like we do and don't require background checks for folks to purchase guns.
Now, we just saw this week in Boulder a local ordinance shot down by a court because it was a statewide issue. Would you prefer to see some kind of federal standard, even maybe if it doesn't go as far as what we have here in Connecticut, but to see more teeth on a federal level? Would that make your job in Waterbury easier?
I think it would make our community much safer. Certainly anything that would require a background check or any type of a process to be in place before a person was actually able to go and purchase a gun across the country would certainly make things better for law enforcement as well as our community.
Well, you know what people are going to say, Chief, and we've all heard these discussions. We're talking about criminals, prohibited persons holding these guns. By definition, the criminals don't follow the law. So this is just a big waste of time. Why are we talking about this? It's not going to help. How do you respond to that criticism?
So it's not a big waste of time. Again, it gives law enforcement, especially in an investigation, a starting point. You know, when you purchase a gun, that gun is registered to you. That gun remains in your registry under your name until you file the proper paperwork here in Connecticut to transfer that weapon into a person's name that you have sold it to, that we're certain is not a prohibited person. So, you know, there's an ability for law enforcement to track these guns and understand where they came from. And it gives us an identity to go back to if, in fact, these guns are used in some type of a crime and we're conducting an investigation. And I don't know of anybody, I really don't, a law-abiding citizen that's gone through the process here in Connecticut that hasn't been able to purchase a gun, whether it was for sporting, their own personal safety, if they felt it was necessary, target shooting, hunting. I really have never had anybody come and complain that they weren't able to purchase a gun here in Connecticut or that the process was too arduous for them to go through.
I want to ask you just a little bit about this shooting that occurred in Colorado, because I'm sure it's something that in the police community, of course, is a topic of conversation. And one of the things we saw was this police officer who was killed inside that grocery store. And I know part of what is talked about in police procedures is that things have changed. It's not wait for some reinforcements to get there and run inside the building. We've talked about these, individual shootings, happening in one individual crime. But when there is a mass shooting, it is a scary event for a police officer, because your training is go right in and find that shooter, right?
Absolutely. And my deepest sympathy goes out to the entire community in Boulder, my coworkers for the loss of fellow officer Talley, who bravely tried to protect his community in that terrible situation. And, our officers train each and every day to protect our community. So when they respond to an active shooter or an incident of shots fired, these officers are running to the scene when the majority of the people are running away. And they're trying to do their best to contain that situation, determine what happened, and protect our public and keep them safer. And we see more unchecked guns coming into the state. We have incidents of shots fired rising, throughout our state. So our officers are responding to these calls for service more and more frequently, and it's definitely a concern for us.
All right, and it is that cop out on patrol who's that first responder who runs in towards those shots, as you said, while everyone else runs away. So, Chief, we appreciate you spending a few minutes this morning and expounding on your testimony that you gave down to Washington remotely, and we hope to have you back on the show again in the future. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you, Eric.
Coming up next here on CT21, the pros and cons of legalizing recreational marijuana. Connecticut is considering it. Chief political reporter Susan Raff tells us what she learned when she crossed into Massachusetts to see how it's all working there. That's coming up.